Hey everyone, today we're covering all of the ages of everyone inside of the realm, beginning with the youngest all the way up to the oldest. Now the developers have mentioned before that everyone in the realm is at least 18. Realistically, this just isn't the case because there's franchise characters like Laurie Strode, who is 17 at the time of the events in 1978's Halloween. Feasibly, this could mean that she was taken however many months after the events of the film until she was 18, but from what it sounds like there's no reference to time passing. For the behavior original characters though, we can almost definitely apply this rule of them being at least 18 years old. Alright, let's get started. First off, we have our characters who are basically impossible to pinpoint the ages of. Pyramid Head is the inner torment of James Sunderland, and Demogorgon is an otherworldly being which really has no identifying point to show its age. So I can't really say anything for them, unfortunately. Nemesis as a bioweapon, and presumably a new one at that, he's probably only a couple of months old, likely under a year since he was probably grown inside of a lab. Also, Nemesis is a prototype, meaning it has to be kind of new still, and an early version. So I'm gonna say less than a year for Nemesis. Next up we have Victor. It states in the lore that the twins began fending for themselves at the age of 5, when their mother falls ill and is then burned to death. After this they are captured by a cult and have a series of experiments done to them over a few years. When they break out, Victor is killed. We know this all happens prior to them being teenagers, as the lore specifically states that Charlotte's teenage years are spent after Victor's death, meaning Victor is anywhere between 7 to 12. However, this is just his physical age. Mentally, he is the same age as Charlotte. We'll cover that when we get to her though. Okay, on to Susie. One of Susie's outfit collections is called Sophomore Jitters, making her a sophomore most likely, and therefore about 15 or 16. However, as this is part of a collection around college application, she could also possibly be 17 or 18 potentially, although the mention of sophomore seems strange to add if she is actually older. It's stated further that Susie and Joey are Julie's best friends, suggesting they are in the same year as her, or at the very least she's about a year above. Assuming Susie is 16, then Joey and Julie are 17 to 18. Okay, moving on to Hag. In her tome lore, we can assume that as she's doing algebra tests at school, then she's about 15 or 16. However, this is prior to the date she is taken by the cannibals. If we just go by the rule that she has to be at least 18, then she's probably 18 when she gets taken, but potentially she is around 16, if we just go with what we know from the tome lore. In Halloween 1978, Laurie Strode is 17. In the 2010 A Nightmare on Elm Street remake, Quentin is 17. Cheryl is 17 during the events of Silent Hill 3. Alessa can also be placed at the same age, I believe. In Stranger Things Season 3, Nancy is 18. In Stranger Things Season 3, Jonathan is 18. Nia is mentioned to start her rebel phase at 16, where then multiple years pass. As she is still in this phase, I predict she is still quite young, so I'm pinning her at 18, more so as she seems quite reckless within the lore, and still quite naive of the world around her. In Stranger Things Season 3, Steve is 19. In Resident Evil 2, Claire is 19. The only reference to Claudette's age is that of her 8th birthday, which isn't much of a help. She's then stated to get an early scholarship at a great college, possibly meaning she is about 17, but likely 18. Sometimes seems to pass while she's at college, making her probably about 19. Legion's Frank is stated in the lore to be 19. As Rin is studying in university during her lore, we can assume that she is at least 18. As she seems to be partly through her time there also, we can say that she's about 19. Meg graduates and then goes on to look after her mother, who falls ill for what is at least a year, meaning depending on what month she was born in, she's either in her late 19th year or early in her 20th. I'm leaning more so to her being 19. Jake drops out of school, presumably college, as this statement is preceded by a reference to his brother graduating from college. It further mentions that then he goes off the grid and lives out in the woods, not contacting his father for years, so at least 2 years. This makes him probably about 20. In Resident Evil 2, Leon is 21. In Halloween 1978, Michael Myers is 21. Dwight drinks moonshine on a work trip, so we can presume that as it's on a work trip, it probably is legal drinking, making him at least 21. This would align also as he seems to have graduated and is already settled in his job at P22. He also appears shocked that the company has existed for only 5 years, meaning he probably didn't join it until quite recently. In a similar way to Dwight, we can assume that Feng is also 21 as she is drinking in bars, meaning it has to be legal. I guess she could technically have a fake ID, but assuming it's legal, then she's 21. This lines up anyway, she's presumably hit her peak esports days around her late teens and is now slightly older when she is determined to to get back into it. Ghostface in DBD isn't directly based on Scream, but certainly takes inspiration from it. The Ghostface killers, plural, in Scream are all around the age of 18, I believe. They're all teenagers. As our Ghostface works for a paper for a minimum of 5 months and appears to also kill in multiple towns, I think Ghosty is about 21, a little older than his Scream counterparts. When Max Thompson Jr. finally snaps and goes on a rampage within the Time Law in the year 1972, we can assume that he's around the age of 18 due to his appearance and the fact that he is still referred to as Boy, and his Time Law being called A Man Named Boy. He then remains on the farm after he slaughters loads of people, likely for a couple years, meaning he's likely 20 to 22, so I'm going down the middle and saying 21. We can presume that Wraith is around the age of 10 during the events of his Time Law, which appears to be during the Nigerian Civil War, which was from 1967 to 1970. A decade or so later, he then moves to the US and starts working at Auto Heaven Records, meaning he's anywhere from about 21 to 25, I think. Yui is stated in her lore to be the youngest female racer to win the All Japan Moto Championship. Now, the youngest female racer I could find who got a similar successful streak to Yui in the similarly named All Japan Road Race Championship was 18 years old, so I suspect Yui was around 18 when she won this race, possibly slightly older. She then goes on to compete in more races after, growing her group, the Sakura 7, to be much larger. I think she's about 21 or 22. Kate's lore states that she begins touring around the country when she gets a Chevy truck, making her likely 18 as she can drive. She is from Pennsylvania though, where the legal age is apparently 16 and a half. The exact time she goes around the country for is unspecific, but it does seem like she goes to quite a few places, all before returning home. She's anywhere from about 19 to 25. I would predict somewhere in the middle at around 22. In Resident Evil 3, Jill is 23. In Silent Hill, Lisa is 23. David's age is very unclear, but he begins his lore by performing well while still in education at rugby, joining some kind of prestigious league before his career is cut short after he assaults a referee. He then retires as his parents are rich and he becomes a debt collector, bare knuckle fighter, and spends his time in bars. I just think due to how many cuts and scars he has and his general more withered appearance, I'm gonna say he's 24. Really, there's no specified time for this though. I only assume he's low 20 still because he actually manages to win most of his fights, so he has to be somewhat close to his prime basically. As both Yun-Jin and Ji-Woon seem quite young in their respective lore, and presumably Yun-Jin is older, I think Trickster is around 24 or 25, due to him appearing fairly young and also at the peak of his fame, or at least on the edge of the peak of his fame, previously in a boy band and such. Typically the peak of success for stars would be their early to mid 20s, especially music stars, and Ji-Woon is just approaching the end of the most successful point when he is taken in the lore. In Resident Evil, Chris is 25. It's stated in the twins lore that years pass after Charlotte's teenage years, where she is alone, so Charlotte is probably in her mid to late 20s. I'm gonna say 25 plus. Adam is stated to graduate university, become qualified as a teacher, work as one for a year before going abroad to Japan to become a teacher there, settling in over the course of multiple months. If we say he was 18 when at university, stayed there for 3 years, and then took another 3 years training as a teacher, having a final year in Japan, then I would predict he's about 26. As Plague is quite physically young it appears, and in her lore, she is said to have quite a quick rise to the position as High Priestess due to the people's love for her, I predict she is likely in her mid-20s, possibly around 26-27. Also because lifespans would have been far shorter back then, she could have feasibly gotten to a position of such power at about the age of 26-27. Yun-Jin obtains an internship at Mighty One Entertainment at 17, working her way up the ranks until she is manager and producer of popular band No Spin and the Trickster, one of its former members. I would predict Yun-Jin is about 27 due to her fast rise, but also because she looks quite young still. Zarina I predict to be around her mid-20s to 30s due to her seemingly fairly long experience stated in the lore as a filmmaker, but also her first major film being fairly recent. She also begins as a documentarian and reporter from her teens, so I think about 28 makes sense, especially as she seems to be quite revered and respected in her field. In Silent Hill, Cybil is 28. I'm pinning Huntress around the age of 30, due to this age seemingly being around the same age as her mother when she left, so it would make sense for then the Huntress to start stealing children and trying to provide for them and keep them safe. Due to her weaponry and the soldiers she fights, it's safe to say that she exists somewhere during World War I, where she is fully grown and fighting. Due to her being so capable, she still has to be quite young and somewhat in her prime, so I'm gonna say 28, although it's possibly up to around 35 or so. Elodie and Felix I'm putting together as their stories are very closely tied, and we can assume they're about the same age when they're taken, which I believe to be about 30. In their lore entries, Felix becomes a successful architect and is about to become a father, and Elodie becomes an occult investigator, the both of them briefly remaining together as such for a short while. Physically, they both appear to be about 30 or so, I would say. Amanda is stated to be in her 30s at the time of her death in Saw 3, I would assume on the younger side of her 30s. As there is no specific age for Jane, it's hard to tell, but she does manage to become pretty successful with her own chat show, as well as beauty and fashion products and such that hold her name. Due to her physical appearance, I suspect she is around her early 30s. I'm gonna say 32. Clown is 22 when he commits his first murder, savoring the finger in a cigar box in the crawl space of his house, later discovered by his father. Clown flees, changing his identity and joining the circus, staying with the circus for the next decade before he is taken, killing as he does. This makes him about 32 or 33, although he could be a little older, but the remainder of his lore is nondescript in the timescale. The events of Trapper's lore begin around late 1890 to the early 1900s. We can presume possibly that the Trapper was born in 1896, as this is the recurring date that Benedict Baker writes from. As Trapper was the original killer of DBD and also originally the only killer plan for the game, this seems pretty likely. Trapper is taken by the entity around the 1930s, which we can figure out due to the similarities of the miners' strike in the Tome lore and the Seattle General Strike of 1919, Trapper being based in Seattle. So this puts Trapper in his 30s to 40s, let's say 35. I predict Oni is around 30 to 35, partly due to his extensive body count and his huge journey throughout Japan, killing all of the fake samurai, also for the fact that he kills his father who fights him one-on-one, meaning his father must be somewhat able in combat and so likely isn't over 50 at the time. Time passes after this event, so about 35 seems reasonable to me. It's hard to tell from his physical appearance due to his mask and also his exaggerated stature. Bubba Sawyer was born in 1938 and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre released in 1974, so presuming this is also the year of it happening, this makes Bubba 36 when he is taken. Jeff seems to leave home at around 18, as well as Ormond at a similar age, becoming a roadie for a while before settling down and getting a steadier desk job after he gets into a fight. He does this desk job for presumably at least a decade or so. He also goes back to art school during this time. Finally, Jeff's father dies at the end of his lore, so I think it's pretty reasonable for Jeff to be around 40 or in his late 30s. Blight is an adult when he joins the British East India Company, taking 7 years to become head chemist, making him at least 25, but more likely about 30. He then experiments on prisoners of the Opium War, which lasted around 3 years, making him about 33. He's then nearly beaten to death for accidentally killing a bunch of people with his serum, leading him to trying to become enlightened and discover another dimension, which he does a bunch of research for. I would say this brings him up to about 40. Nurse is said to be married already when her lore starts, so we can assume she is at least 18, and she's with her husband for at least a few years, up to about a decade or so, as her husband Andrew builds a house for them during this time. After Andrew dies, Sally works at Crota's Pren for 2 decades, making her minimum 38, but more likely around 40 to 45. As Doctor goes through medical school at a high level, we can assume he is at least 28. However, after the stated years of his work at Larry's and other sites, it's probable he's around 40 to 50, so let's say 45. If we align his work with MK Ultra projects, which lasted around 15 to 20 years, then this seems about fair. I'm putting Slinger's age at 46, as his early days inventing for Henry Bayshore and rail companies seem to last a while, before his outrage and imprisonment for 15 years, which puts him around the age of 40. Slinger then has a deal with the prison warden to collect other prisoners for him. He does this for 6 years before he takes revenge on Bayshore for stealing his ideas and selling them on, making him around 46 when taken, anywhere from 40 to 50 most likely. The original Nightmare on Elm Street films apparently have Freddy burned to death at just 26, however in the 2010 remake he's clearly much older. As there is no definitive age for the 2010 remake Freddy, I'm going to assume he's about 50, the same age as actor Jackie L. Haley, who portrayed him at the time. David Tapp is 50 when he is killed in Saw. At the beginning of Ash vs. Evil Dead, Ash is 57, but as the series progresses over multiple years, he's likely around the age of 59 in Season 3. Ace's lore states, with his sharp Italian looks, grey streaked hair, and silver tongue, he could pass for an aging 50s movie star. If we presume Ace was taken in his release year of 2016, this makes him in his mid-70s. I really don't think he looks that old though personally. Potentially aging 50s is more so a reference to him being around the age of 50. I'm not sure, I'm going to say 55 to 70. That's quite a wide wide span, but hey. Bill was in the Vietnam War. From his tome cutscene, he appears to be closer to his late 20s, early 30s. However, this is likely nearer the end of the war, around 1975. Bill is probably at least in his 60s. If we say that Left 4 Dead's outbreak began in the same year that the game was released in, then Bill would be 63, although this could reasonably be closer to 70 or late 70s, depending on his age and the point in time of the tome cutscenes. And the entity is mentioned in the Arcus entries to possibly precede the Earth itself, making it at least 4.5 billion years old and likely older. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Please do drop any additions or corrections below if you think I got something wrong. Thanks, and goodbye.